it's your friendly neighborhood potato witch. Welcome to the show. In my most recent video, I showcased a number of demos for upcoming games that really caught my interest. One of those games was Voice of Cards, The Isle Dragon Roars, which has a mouthful of a name but looked really cool to me. So today I thought I'd dive into the full version of the game and let you all know what I thought. First, I want to say a huge thank you to the good folks at Square Enix for providing me a copy of this game for the PS4. Part of me is still convinced that was an accident or something, but regardless, I am incredibly grateful for this opportunity. So, Voice of Cards, The Isle Dragon Roars was released on October 28th, 2021, and is a single-player RPG that, as you can see from the footage on screen, uses cards as its gimmick. As I said in my demo reel video, basically, it's cards. Everything is cards. People are cards, items are cards, equipment is cards, the terrain is laid out with a pattern of cards, which is a nifty aesthetic, I'll give it that, but the game plays out a lot like a classic RPG in pretty much all other respects. Rather than keeping track of a whole load of different cards that you draw at random from a deck, the cards are representational. Each character in your party is represented by a card, each attack or skill they can use in battle is represented by a card, all of the items and equipment you acquire are represented by cards, but how you use them is no different than what you do in any number of classic RPGs. Swords and armor get equipped, items get used, terrain gets traversed, no big deal. It really is just the aesthetic. But that aesthetic lends the game a very different feel to a lot of RPGs. You don't typically start playing a random Final Fantasy game, for instance, and feel like you're sitting down with your buddies at the kitchen table ready for game night. You feel like you're playing a video game. You feel like you're experiencing an epic adventure on your TV screen or your computer monitor. But with Voice of Cards, the setup feels very reminiscent of friends gathering to play a tabletop RPG. You've got a narrator describing things to you and providing character dialogue, setting the scenes really well. Some skills will involve rolling dice for modifiers or effects. Instead of the adventure expanding and becoming a huge epic ordeal that constantly seems to get bigger, Voice of Cards changes direction and makes the whole thing feel like it's pulling inward, shrinking until it can fit comfortably in your living room. Now, don't get me wrong, the adventure is no less fun for all that it feels homey and approachable. It's just an interesting direction to take. Though it makes sense when you consider how popular tabletop gaming is these days, not only with people running their own campaigns, but also watching the exploits of others via services like Twitch. To bring things back home, so to speak, makes a lot of sense to me when I look at it that way. So what is Voice of Cards exactly? Well, for one thing, it's a game where there's a logo that looks like there's two demons about to make out. So it's got that going for it. Seriously though, Voice of Cards plays out, as I said, like a standard RPG. If you played the game's demo, you might be surprised to learn that you're not actually playing the Ivory Order trio of Winifred, Hedwyn, and Berwyn, but instead are playing as Ash, or whatever you want to name him. But I'm going with default names here for simplicity's sake. When Queen Nilla orders a rampaging dragon slain and offers a huge reward to go with it, Ash and his monster companion Mar jump at the chance to become famous rich heroes. We saw this at the end of the demo, so the demo acts as a sort of prelude to the main game itself, which I thought was kinda neat. Anyway, Ash and Mar, along with some other people they pick up along the way, set off on their grand adventure to find the dragon and beat the Ivory Order to the punch, so to speak. But naturally, since this is a JRPG, things aren't quite what they seem on the surface, and both the Ivory Order and the dragon itself hold secrets that could drastically affect the world. Does that count as a spoiler? I mean, this is an RPG. You kinda come to expect plot twists from games like this after you've played a few of them. A selective and powerful organization has secrets isn't really that big of a surprise. Voice of Cards is a surprisingly short game, with HowLongToBeat.com listing the average time to beat the main story as 12 hours, with 20 hours for a full completionist run. And while I love me some long RPGs, I have no problems with shorter RPGs either, provided the story and gameplay are still compelling. And Voice of Cards does succeed on both counts. The story, while being fairly simple, still held enough intrigue to keep me engaged, and it was fun to travel the world in the form of cards and what looks like a reappropriated chess piece. The gameplay was pretty much the same, honestly. Simple, but engaging, and I'm fine with that. Like any good RPG, growth comes from experience gained in battle, and Voice of Cards is no exception here. Random encounters on the overworld map or in dungeons are part of the whole experience. And while the turn-based battles pretty much play out as typical RPG battles do, as I mentioned earlier, it's here that I feel the game really leans into its tabletop RPG inspirations. You move to a battle board complete with candles, coins, dice off to the side, everything to complete the aesthetic. Each turn you gain a gem, which is banked up here in this little box thingy. Some attacks and skills your party can use are reliant on gems, so this brings an element of strategy that goes beyond mashing buttons till you win. Some attacks don't cost anything, which means you end up with a gem banked at the end of your turn. Some cost a single gem, so you can use those skills with the gem you just acquired. And more powerful abilities cost 2 or more gems, so you can't just spam the heck out of your strongest attacks without consequence. Melanie the Mage can use a water attack with a chance of freezing the enemy for the cost of 2 gems, but now Ash has no gems to use for his Heal Plus spell. It's a balancing act. Sometimes you have to use your basic attacks to stockpile enough gems to use stronger skills later. It's one way the game keeps you on your toes and provides some strategy to an otherwise pretty simple battle scheme. It also encourages you to go all out when you need to, without worrying about wasting MP or something. MP just doesn't exist here. There's no need to concern yourself with rationing party heals, because if you've got the gems in battle and you don't have any other use for them, why not make sure everyone's at their best before the fight ends? I admit, it took me a little while to get out of my standard mindset of only using high-powered attacks and skills in battle when I absolutely had to. I ended so many battles with the maximum numbers of gems banked, unused, when I could have easily just used some to make the fight go faster. Nothing except HP carries over from one battle to the next, so make use of your gems and take advantage of the spells and attacks you have at your disposal. There's really no reason not to. Speaking of skills, characters learn a variety of them while leveling up. You can have 4 skills equipped on each character at any given time, but the good thing is that the skills are very mix and match, I guess might be a good term to use. If you learn a skill that you don't think you need right now, fine, you don't have to add it to your current list of equipped skills. But that doesn't mean the chance to use it has gone. That skill has still been learned even if it's not active in battle, and you can switch out old skills for new ones at any time that you can access the game's menu. This allows you to optimize your characters with attacks and spells that you think will benefit you the most in any given situation. Going into a volcano? You're probably not going to be using that fire spell anytime soon, so go ahead and replace it with a skill that can do dark elemental damage instead. Want the fire spell back? Just re-equip the card. Easy. The customization is honestly pretty nice. There are also abilities, which are passive traits that confer advantages in battle. This can be anything from increasing the power of elemental attacks, decreasing elemental damage you receive, or allowing you to recover some HP after your turn. These are nice, but honestly, aside from the passive healing abilities, I didn't think they made too much difference to the game. Battles were neither easier nor harder depending on whether I had certain characters with specific abilities in my party. It might have been the difference between a point or 2 of damage either way, but that's not really a big deal to me, and fights never came to that sort of nail-biting edge-of-your-seat scenario for me, so it was easy to forget that certain abilities were even in effect at the time. Though that might have also been because I kept myself pretty well healed up thanks to outright abuse of the jump ability. See, as you explore a map, the cards around you flip over, revealing details about the terrain. And the jump ability is basically a quick move thing so that you can travel to any upturned terrain card, saving you from having to painstakingly move your little chess piece avatar one card at a time. But what does that mean when you leave town and fight monsters all the way to a dungeon entrance and then want to heal up before continuing? Just jump back to town, skip all the battles, heal up, then jump right back to where you left off without anything getting in your way. Incredibly convenient, but I kinda suspect it wasn't meant to be used quite like that. Plus, it meant skipping opportunities to level build, so there's that drawback too. I mean, it's not too big a drawback because for the most part, you'll have the right amount of strength to handle battles that come your way, and enough money to make sure your party is fully kitted out in the best equipment. But towards the end of the game, the price and difficulty curves ramp up noticeably. Instead of just making your way through a forest or across the hills to the next story element, suddenly you're presented with multi-floor dungeons. And while you probably have enough money to make sure you stocked up on items and equipment with cash to spare, suddenly the price of armor and weapons jumps a lot and you'll either have to grind for levels and money, or else leave a couple of people with less than optimal equipment. It wasn't an insurmountable difficulty spike, and I don't mind a good level grind now and then, so it didn't bother me per se, but I did notice it. Level grinding is made a heck of a lot more enjoyable by the game's soundtrack, which I could listen to for hours. Composed mainly by Oliver Good and Okabe Keiichi, it has a lot of Irish or Celtic inspiration behind it, and it fits the tone of the game perfectly. It has a very clear fantasy feel to it, and I love that. Just give a listen to a couple of tracks and tell me your toes didn't start tapping. See what I mean? Okay, so now I've heaped a load of praise on the game, and I do now want to talk about an aspect of it that really bothered me. This is absolutely a case of your mileage may vary, but I think it bears discussion. Okay, so most of the game's humor really appealed to me. The dry humor of the narrator especially, combined with some snarky commentary on character choices and actions, made me chuckle a fair few times. But not all the humor landed well. See, Voice of Cards makes some, I guess, pseudo-jokes against groups that are already maligned in many ways. What do I mean by that? Well, the game itself doesn't make the jokes outright, but there are comments that are a sort of wink and nod to well-known stereotypes. Whether it's a comment about large women and food.
The woman tells you she's so terrified of what might happen if the dragon attacks the town. She hasn't been able to eat.
Gay men.
An unspoken friendship begins to form between the two. Or at least, you hope that's what the prolonged silence between them means.
Trans folk.
It sounds like a man, but you can't really be sure in these woods.
Or women with muscles being unattractive and unlovable.
I will never be a beautiful bride like this, Melanie mutters sadly.
The game isn't actively maligning people in those groups so much as it's making comments that say to the player, I know you know what I'm referencing. And that didn't sit well with me. Because, come on, it is 2021, we shouldn't still be making comments about being uncomfortable when two dudes make eyes at each other, or insinuating that pretty men might not actually be men. We should be beyond this. But Voice of Cards apparently feels pretty comfortable drawing on that stereotyping for its humor, and that is not okay. The writers could and should have done better here. Like I said, your mileage may vary with this one. I noticed that stuff because, well, I belong to multiple marginalized groups, and most of us learn pretty quickly how to see all the stereotypes and comments that society makes about us and other marginalized people. It's easy to say that I'm just being oversensitive, that it's just a joke, nobody got hurt. But the thing about sensitivity to jokes like that, imagine you have a bruise on your arm, and people keep poking it, constantly. You can't run into a person without them jabbing at your bruise. Not maliciously, just, hey, you have a bruise here, poke. After a while, you'll start to get wary of meeting people because your experience tells you that they will do something thoughtless that will hurt you. In other words, you get sensitive. That's kind of what it's like. So to see that sort of reference material in this game kinda sucked, because I have enough worry about people judging me, thanks, and I'd rather my video games didn't keep reflecting an inconsiderate and damaging mentality. If you didn't see a problem with that stuff, fine. But I did, and I thought it was worth mentioning here because I am not the only person who might be bothered by that sort of humor. Okay, now that I've had my rant about that, back to some more positive aspects of the game. So as you explore, you'll have plenty of NPCs in town to talk to, and some of them will give you side quests, I guess. They're less questy and more just interactions where you have to pick the right option, like offering someone some medicine when they need it. But sometimes you'll be rewarded with a mysterious card. There are 10 in total to collect, none of them particularly difficult to find or obtain if you make sure to talk to everyone and explore the map thoroughly. You might think that they don't do anything in the game other than act as a collectible for completion's sake, but in actuality, getting them all allows you to access the game's good ending. Because yes, Voice of Cards is a game with multiple endings. There are 4 in total, all of which hinge on a single decision you make at the end of the game. Which is good, in a way, because a conveniently timed save can allow you to see 3 of the endings just by reloading and picking a different option, even if you didn't get all the mysterious cards. And if that's the case, no worries at all, because there's a New Game Plus option in Voice of Cards, allowing you to carry over your levels and equipment and all of that good stuff, making a second playthrough of the game so much easier and faster. There's also additional content available in a New Game Plus, such as actually being able to win a battle that was previously unwinnable in a first playthrough. There's also a bonus dungeon and boss fight in New Game Plus, though it is technically also available in a first playthrough if you reload your save from before beating the game's final boss. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, since usually content obtainable in a New Game Plus mode can't be found in a first run of the game, not unless there's a more open ending and a post-game. It's an odd choice and does kind of eliminate the draw of New Game Plus, honestly. Being overpowered is great, being able to beat that previously unwinnable fight is kinda cool, but that's really the main benefit of it. That and a chance to collect any of the mysterious cards that you might have missed. Each of the characters has a legendary weapon that they can use, which are obtainable in a variety of locations. Naturally, they can't just be bought from generic shops, you gotta put effort into finding these things. Same thing with legendary armor. Now, it's not necessary to actually get all that stuff if you don't want to, but unsurprisingly, it can make the final chapter a heck of a lot easier if you've got the best equipment. If you're going for a completion run, then you'll also end up talking to every NPC and fighting a lot of different monsters multiple times, as well as buying all the equipment and items you can. In addition to just generic trophy achievements for collecting every piece of gear or all the medicines in the game, there are also tons of cards that add to the game's lore. Completely missable, not remotely necessary to enjoy the game, but getting everything does add a certain depth to the world, making it feel properly fleshed out. Fight a certain monster once, for instance, and you can see its card in your collection, complete with a little bit of info about it. Fight that same monster enough times, and the flip side story unlocks, adding more information to the back of the card. Sometimes it's a bit more about that particular monster, sometimes it's a piece of a legend, but it adds more layers to the story and setting overall. Same thing with NPCs, although their stories fully unlock usually after talking to them just once. Sometimes it's the little touches like that which really add to a game, especially such a short one where you have no logical reason to go around and find out about the life and times of mushroom monsters. It's for the player's benefit alone, and I can appreciate that. Besides, I like collecting things, so this? Right up my alley. Why do you think I like monster catching games so freaking much? So, is there anything else to do in this game? Well, actually yes. This game that is based on cards has an in-world card game for you to play at game parlors. It's a pretty simple game where you match card values to create sets, and the player with the highest set value at the end is the winner. As you win each match, new optional rules get introduced, like skill effects that could make players miss a turn, or a joker card that forces every player to exchange one of their sets with another player. Each additional rule makes the game harder, but it's still kind of fun, and a nice break from the main game. You do get rewards from the game, but aside from the rewards that are basically new optional rules, you mostly get optional cosmetic changes, like being able to change the appearance on the backs of cards. Plus trophies, I guess. You always gotta have trophies. It's also Voice of Cards' only multiplayer aspect. You can play the card game with other players instead of just relying on the game's AI opponents. Kinda cool that, but as with pretty much every multiplayer option in PS4 games, I can't take advantage of that because I don't have PS Plus. Also, I'm not sure who I'd play it with anyway. So really, there isn't a whole lot of optional content in Voice of Cards that really yields anything. The legendary weapons and armor are good, yeah, and the mysterious cards give you access to the game's best ending, but pretty much everything else is there just to get trophies and achievements from, rather than giving you anything in the game itself. I mean, the game is meant to be a relatively short RPG experience. It was never intended to be some sort of long-lasting, open-world, hundreds of hours long video game, which is fine. I have absolutely no problems with that. But it would have been nice if there was some reward tied to more of the optional content. Maybe making some piece of legendary armor tied to speaking to all the NPCs and unlocking their stories. Or give me a fancy unique weapon for winning the card game with the hardest rule set. Something. Really though, Voice of Cards is a pretty decent game, and while it's not perfect, I still enjoyed playing it. I got into the story enough that I was emotionally invested, and a few key scenes near the end really made me have to stop and think about my actions, and all the potential outcomes of any given choice. Some of the scenes were outright heartbreaking, especially once you reach the Isle of Blight and tackle the game's last few chapters. The tone of the game may have started off relatively lighthearted, but it takes a very dark turn after a while, and you start to feel the weight of your decisions. Do I recommend Voice of Cards? Yeah, generally. It's nice to have a short RPG experience every now and again, and the art and music were simply breathtaking, and I really appreciated the game's aesthetics and the way it brought the adventure so close to home. Some aspects I could have done without, and I think a couple of things might do well to be tweaked a little in order to reward the player with something beyond an achievement on a profile page, but overall I think the positives very much outweigh the negatives. It was a good game, and I recommend it both to newcomers of the RPG genre who want to dip their toes in without committing to a 40-hour plus game, and also to RPG veterans who might be in the mood for a small classic story with a neat gimmick. It may look irreverent on the surface at times, but it's got a lot of heart, and I think it's worth people giving it a chance if they have the opportunity. Hey, thanks for watching my review of Voice of Cards: The Isle Dragon Roars. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, big shout out and thank you to the folks at Square Enix for providing me a copy of this game. I didn't expect that to happen, but it did, and I'm grateful. If you like this video, please click that little like button to let me know, and please consider subscribing if you haven't already. The vast majority of views on my videos come from people who aren't subscribed yet, and I'd love to be able to hit 200 subs by the end of this year. I have lots of videos planned for the future, so stay tuned for more RPG goodness in the coming months. Until then, friends, stay safe and happy gaming.